Live from Austin, Texas. This is the Plutopia. This is the Tangled. This is the Plutopia News Network Happy Hour, and our guest this evening, Michael Garfield. The not ready for cable news players are all here, including me with my tangled tongue or tungle tang. I'm Scoop Sweeney. We have Susie Sheeler, Maggie Duvall, and our server for this evening, John Lebkowski. So don't forget to tip your server.
What do you want me to serve?
Serve this show. It needs all the help it can get after that disjointed introduction.
Well, I think it's just great that we have Michael with us.
Welcome, Michael.
Hey, Michael.
Thanks.
I'm confused about, so are you with the Long Now Foundation now? Is that your gig?
I'm working full-time for the Santa Fe Institute, and I'm working 5 hours a week for Long Now. But they are great, and I absolutely adore them, and I am super grateful to be involved.
And a perfect fit.
You know Stuart Candy? Is he still there?
Yeah. Actually, I have to get back to him about getting him on my show. He's actually, I actually met him in person through SFI. He actually came and gave a presentation at the Cohen campus in the before times, like when we could like congregate. It was a beautiful thing.
Yeah, Stuart's
he's a cool guy.
I have a, oh, here it is.
He has a thing.
Yeah, can you see that?
Oh, wow.
Oh.
The coin. Yes.
Carpe Millennium, Long Now. I think I got that from Stuart. Anyway.
The whole damn millennium.
Yeah. I'm waiting for the Long Now to get shorter. That was supposed to inspire uproarious laughter, but it did not.
Okay,
so what's it like, Michael, doing social media for people who are committed to the concepts of complexity? You get a lot of strange attractors out there.
That's a fun turn of phrase, and yes, you do. I've been thinking a lot of it in terms of the anchorite monks, the ones that lived in the wall of the monastery and were fed by the monks inside the monastery and then received messages from pilgrims and correspondents outside, and essentially hermits. That's been my position recently, is that I am somehow in the middle of everything and yet totally isolated in this very weird way. But it's beautiful because it brings me into conjunction with all kinds of extraordinary people. I mean, not to, I guess actually to riff on the neck of that Brachiosaurus behind me, it is kind of a bottleneck, right? Like, to be a component of the throat of an organization like that is really something. Our communications team is 2 people. My boss, Jenna Marshall, the manager of communications at SFI, handles like press relations and stuff, but it's really, it's a small crew, so I guess if I'm going to keep piling metaphors on this Sunday, it kind of feels like, like we're watching The Wall, Game of Thrones style. And every once in a while you do get the zombies that you have to fight off. There are a lot of weird people that have been magnetized by the grand unifying vision, which is totally not what complex systems is about. Really, I just had an interesting conversation with Carnegie Mellon and SFI external professor Simon Judeo about this, because he just posted a new paper on Bayesian reasoning and consilience, and basically, he was able to decompose the aesthetic of simplicity into a number of different kinds of, like, co-explanatory value being one, a number of different ways that we think about making, like, why we are attracted to a particular explanation for something. And it's just, it's funny because you're looking into the gyrus of this, like, trying to make things as simple as possible, but no simpler than they must be. And like, the more you look into it, the more complicated it becomes, the more complex everything appears itself. It's a kind of eschatological concern, really.
It's like a powers of 10 kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's what came to my mind when you said that.
Well, there's another podcaster, Jim Rutt. I'm sure you're familiar with Jim Rutt, and he was, I guess, he was director there for a while.
Yeah, he was the chair of the board, I think, for a while. He's still a trustee at SFI. Yeah, Jim's a hoot.
Oh yeah, and so there's a bunch of people who have been talking about the term that I hear a lot is sense making, but really kind of trying to make sense of things and trying to figure out like what comes next. And Jim and some of the people that he was associated with came up with this idea of there being kind of the way things have been is game A. What is game B going to be? And there's a big ongoing conversation about game B. And it's really sort of like, okay, we understand that at any time now, this thing that we have, whatever it is, the kind of reality vector that we're in, could just collapse. And if that happens, we should be ready with a plan for what to do next. And that's kind of what the game B thing is about. Have you been acquainted with that at all?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, again, referencing my background here, and, the in-joke of Isla Sorna as Site B, I think, to me, the game B conversation is fascinating and urgent and important, but it's also, I think about the characterization of modernity as, like, Zygmunt Bauman's liquid modernity. He talks about how it is both obsessed with control and radically self-undermining. And so you get, when you hear people talk about stuff like, how do we come up with a better system? It's very, very difficult to identify the blind spots that prevent us from thinking that we can just innovate our way out of the predicament that we're in. It's like, if the only solution is forward escape, as Terence McKenna was fond of saying, I mean, that seemed like it made sense in the 90s. I think it makes a whole lot less sense now, when we're like, wait, you're saying that we should just double down on plastic islands? I struggle with this because, as someone with a paleontological purview, I think of collapse as inherent in all of this, and the importance of, like, a flushing or a
Cosmic colonic.
yeah, kind of. Yeah, that that capitalism needs a detox, right? I guess is how you put it. And we're going to get that. And or like the way that, but where does it go, right? And so we're back to this question. This is something I've been chewing on since like 2013, when I thought about the great oxygenation event of 2 billion years ago. this was a catastrophe created by photosynthesis, right? The first industrial pollution, atmospheric disaster, where oxygen didn't exist in the atmosphere at first, and then it did. Like photosynthesis generated enough oxygen that it became a threat to everything that was alive on the planet. And it's funny because, you look at it in terms of like, oh, well, we got to go into our bunkers. Well, it's like, well, that's what anaerobic bacteria did. They retreated into the ground and into your guts. They're still hiding in the bunkers and arguably still controlling the world from the bunkers, so like a lot of this conspiracy theory stuff is actually, in my mind, just a kind of a poetic misappropriation of our own evolutionary history. But the golden lining there is that we figured it out. We figured a way to metabolize oxygen, and I think we're, I have an exquisitely tuned Google News feed. And it tells me that we're getting closer every day to metabolizing all kinds of insanity, the plastics and the radiation and all kinds of other industrial byproducts that we produce. So it's, I don't think about it so much as like we can't keep growing indefinitely on a finite planet. That's clear. But a rainforest does that. A rainforest grows indefinitely into itself. It's like an Ouroboros, So I imagine it is sort of a roiling transition, that we end up finding a way to just like, close all the loops. And I think that's where the game beast stuff gets really interesting in terms of,
back to what you were saying about bacteria and realizing that where we are, like the bacteria living in our gut right now, that was their game B, right? And they probably didn't really, I can imagine the bacteria sitting around and saying, well, we've got to come up with a game B. And they probably didn't envision that would be it. And we probably, for all the imagination that we can put on the table to try to figure out what our game B is, we're probably not really going to figure it out. We can only, we can maybe identify some choices that might influence it.
I kind of wonder if the plant life on the planet, the ones that depend on photosynthesis, can't even talk tonight, photosynthesis, are rooting for the increased CO2 because they love it. So, we may not like it. It may not be good for us, but maybe we're headed off to try and find our own plan B, and this is their new world.
I totally feel like the earth is trying to get rid of us. I think that I think we're kind of parasitic. And I think that just over this last year, so much has come back. I've seen wildlife I haven't seen in a long time. Venice has dolphins jumping around in the canal. So is it possible that the earth is just saying, we're not doing this anymore? I'm not doing this anymore. I had enough.
There's the whole Aristotelian golden mean issue, right? And I think it is true that we need to restore a balance, and that stuff like the coronavirus is bringing us, it's kind of like a knock on the head. It's a reminder. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff about the way that animals have reclaimed urban spaces during this year. Ultimately, it's, we've gotten carried away with an ideology, and everything that I've read, everything that, all signs point to, opening the plan up to the sort of a more democratic relationship to reality. By which I mean non-human agency. The Interspecies IO project. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's a really exciting initiative. And like,
I don't know about that, but it does sound exciting, and I would love to hear about that, honestly.
well, I mean, like, Peter Gabriel, Neil Gershenfeld, Vint Cerf, there's a few other folks. MIT is now heavily involved in that, just looking at ways to establish non-human communication, that the machine learning has taken this huge spike. And so there may be ways that we can actually start sharing a semiotic space intentionally with other organisms, which is really jazzy.
Yeah.
Wow.
And in a less maybe scientific realm, a lot of the people I'm interested in following are talking about, they're reclaiming. I mean, our indigenous friends have been in this space for forever. But there's like this maybe these European cultures that have forgotten that understanding that everything is alive, and go sit out and talk to a tree for a while, sing to a tree and see what the tree gives back to you, that kind of thing. And that's what I've been paying attention to on that level, because there's something about this that's like really, it's like ding, 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 pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. That this forgetting that everything around us is got this some kind of sentience. And
okay, so I was just going to say, does it have to actually be something that someone considers a sentient being? I mean, because something is alive, does that in fact make it sentient?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's to the root of the issue is, I like SFI's president, David Krakauer, defines complexity science as the study of adaptive matter, and he takes a kind of a hard line on panpsychism insofar as it goes down to systems that are responding to their environments, like sensing and responding, so I like that. And I think that's frank and Copernican, and, it's not the same as perhaps, a harder argument about like,
well, maybe they're sentient. We just don't know how to
this.
know that. Yeah. That's what y'all are doing though, is figuring that out, I guess.
Yeah. I mean,
well, and I've also been interested in the, maybe less sentient and more about consciousness, some kind of consciousness, or like a conscious universe. I've been falling into the work of Dr. Jude Curran lately, and the idea of, I've always lived in, except for here in Austin, well, this latest place, but I've lived in these old houses, and they have a certain, in my mind, a certain consciousness. I have a dialogue with these spaces, and I consider them the amalgamation of all these other consciousnesses that came to build them somehow. So that's what I've been like exploring myself, is seeing that everything, the painting over here, the, everything that went into, it's beyond the kind of story of stuff idea of like, it's even bigger than that. Like, all the hands that made this thing, like all the, the elements, the minerals, that went in, like, what would it look like? That's what I meditate on. What would it look like if I understood this guitar here, this cow skull over here, this lamp, this computer are in some kind of really interesting dialogue with me, if I choose to pay attention to it. But that's getting a bit freaky here. But anyway.
No, I do the same thing. Honestly, I talk to inanimate objects all the time.
I'm going to take it totally down the vortex and share my screen here for this epic. Have you seen this? Buildings are sentient and evil.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Oh my God, this is so wonderful. Yeah,
Wow.
this is really fascinating because it gets into this question about, like, again, I sent this to David Krakauer and he said it was totally crazy, but he did lead author a paper this year on the information theory of individuality and about ecological scaffolding, and how the drawing on work like the work of Gregory Bateson and the idea of extended cognition, and the idea that the mind is something that is like distributed in systems. That we are a colonial organism, human beings, and we're not individuals in the way that we were trained to think so, as like residually from like a rational modern, I am a self-authoring guy over here. It's not even just the social aspect. I mean, most people, I feel like, now are kind of hip to the fact that we are constantly in the process of revising a living document of the ego narrative through social interactions, and that's the way that the brain works. But there's this whole other piece of it, which is the homunculus, and the way that the sort of hook, like Klein bottle yin yang thing going on between the idea that we have of ourselves and the idea that we have of our environments in the enacted relationships between the self and the environment. Richard Doyle at Penn State talks a lot about the co-imbrication of everything in Darwin's Pharmacy, Sex, Plants, and the Evolution of the Noosphere, which is like one of my favorite books of all time. Huge thumbs up to him. Metanoia Press. If you have a chance, folks, I recommend go checking them out. And Richard Doyle, just set a toe in those waters, because it really is revolutionary. But so this is like the hilarious Reddit version of that, which is this notion that this is we're like before metanoia, paranoia, right? Like before you dissolve into realizing that everything is in relation with everything else. It's like, oh my God, everything's out to get me.
Yeah.
It's the Chapel Perilous moment that Robert Anton Wilson talked about. So this is that. Buildings are sentient and evil. So
yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Well,
some of them are. I mean, look at the Amityville Horror. So come on.
I noticed they couldn't help but work in Freemasonry as part of the conspiracy. That always seems to crop up in every wacky conspiracy theory.
I saw that too.
It's a little too good. Yeah. I mean, that was Simon DeDeo's point about this, is that when virtues become vices, he talks about this in his latest paper about, sometimes the best co-explanatory description of reality, the sexiest, most alluring description that explains everything, is actually the trap, because it's the reality is actually much more complex or much more complicated than that. We're looking for parsimony, but we, sometimes we cut ourselves with that, with Occam's razor.
Well, on the subject of reality, I read your transcript of the Long Now Foundation presentation you did on reality and deepfakes. And I was fascinated by how that reminds me of the early days of the World Wide Web, when it was originally just a bunch of techie, people, early adopters like me and like John and all the people here. And suddenly it became popular because word got around that you could get free pornography on the World Wide Web. And then when I first heard about deepfakes, my mouth upending it again, the deepfakes were being popularized not by some technology person, but they found out that there were pornography deepfakes out there, and that's what would really took off. And all of a sudden, of course, the bad actors in the political sphere took on the deepfakes and ran with it.
The pornographers are such pioneers.
What is this going to do to reality? Will we have anything left of it?
I don't have an answer for you, but I mean, I was just at a weird twist. Like right after giving that talk, I was approached by a social media influencer campaign that wanted me to actually work with Reface, the app that I was talking about in the talk. Like the next day, they were like, "Hey, you've got over 10,000 Instagram followers. Do you want to do a Reface campaign?" And I was like, "Oh God, how can I make this?" I mean, yes, I guess I should. I guess I have a responsibility to do this, and I guess I would be refacing myself into Jurassic Park, doing the Ian Malcolm, you didn't stop to think, whether or not you should. But it's, of course, these things are all, again, like buildings are evil. These things are kind of out of our control at this point, because the incentive structures are there. The people want this stuff, and so it's. I think really it's just we've been sweeping the tide for the last 400 years of, pretending like we knew what the real was. And it's just time to let that sandcastle go, and accept our place in a larger cosmogony,
Well,
and
it's kind of a weird human arrogance, I guess, about that, about assuming that. But then, if you're a cat or a dog, you probably don't realize that what you're seeing is really just models being constructed in your brain based on your perceptions, right? But humans can kind of get that. So we can actually get to a meta position where we realize that what we think is real is constructed, and there's no way that we can depend reliably on that construction being a completely accurate representation of reality. What's green for me may be blue for you, and whatever, we'd never know. So we're kind of in this position of, as a matter of course, we have to assume that we're seeing the reality of our environment in order to manipulate it and deal with it and survive. But on the other hand, things have grown more complex. I know you think about complexity a lot. Things have grown more and more complex for humans and for the human mind and so forth. And we're starting to construct all kinds of weird narratives about the reality we think we're in. And some of those narratives are kind of going off the rails now. And the question is, where do you find any authority for reality at this point? Because as of today, partly because of the situation we're in with Donald Trump being supposedly an authoritative figure who constantly tells us that what we see and what we hear is probably not real and that we should just listen to him. And then you've got people like the QAnon people who are trying to make sense of things by coming up with kind of a narrative that they think could be real. And they've convinced themselves that it is real. And there's other people who have other narratives. And now we have narrative wars. And I think that this is problematic in a big way. And it is deeply related to the fact that that we evolved through mass media to the internet with some sense of an authority for what's real. But once we got into the internet era, it was like there's this major balkanization of perception and sense making, and now we have factions, factions of people who have different belief systems, And it's becoming so fragmented that there's a question about, like with Humpty Dumpty, whether we'd ever be able to put it back together again. You got any thoughts about that?
I mean, the thing about Humpty Dumpty is that, like, should Humpty Dumpty have stayed an egg? Nobody ever talks about what came out of the egg, right? No one ever talks about, everybody just talks about trying to put the pieces back together, but like, where did the chicken go?
They just yolk about it.
Well, I can give a very quick story. When everything fell apart in my life about 19 years ago, when my mother died and my husband left, that's not the point. The point is that I had this image in my mind of a carefully constructed reality of the way the world was supposed to go and the way it was. And then I had this image that of being in this like glass circular box, and the reality was painted on it. And it was like a big, huge 2x4 came and shattered it to a million bits. And I was suddenly there, and it was like, it feels like now, right? That's my point. Feels like now. It was like nothing makes sense anymore. But if that had not happened to me, I wouldn't have been able to go on my adventures to play with constructing reality the way I wanted to play with it. It freed me to go on all these adventures, right? And that's kind of the trajectory of my life. It's like, okay, how chaotic can it be? Because I find the really cool stuff out of the chaos. I'm not saying that everybody should go through that thing and it's been hard and all that, but I think about how incredibly boring my life would have been if I had continued on this particular trajectory. And I got to see all these amazing things and still am doing it and all that, but there's just something about this feeling of really flat dimensionality to what we consider normal, what was normal. And it's like, to me, after going through a kind of sense of grief through COVID and politics and everything right now, even though everything's terrifying, I have this feeling that like it's getting really interesting now, because the committee that said everything's supposed to be this way doesn't exist anymore, so to speak, at least in my mind. Like, so what can the world look like? Like, I'm thinking about playing with reality, and is reality malleable, and like what's going to come out of it. So anyway, that's just throwing that out there.
I mean, it is very scary for a lot of people. I am most concerned for the people that are not at that level of, excitement for engaging with it in a kind of masterful, magical way, who see it as an opportunity. I mean, to me, it really is a democratization of the, like everyone's getting access to the cybernetic switchboard, but if you don't realize that that's what's going on, then, I mean, Doug Rushkoff was writing about this in the 90s, talking about the dangers of being programmed by people if you don't have, basic literacies in these spaces. And so, it really is, I mean, statistics are so malleable in terms of like their, the presentation of a scientific fact. It's extraordinary. I had for the other podcast I host, Complexity for SFI, I talked to Carl Bergstrom and Jevin West a few episodes ago about their book Calling Bullshit, The Art of Skepticism for a Data-Driven World. And I highly recommend people check that book. I mean, it is fundamental. And then, also Howard Rheingold of Long Now has a course in in media literacy in this regard as well. I'm spacing on the name at this moment, but like getting people trained on how to actually operate these technologies is so essential right now, because otherwise we're just all getting played, and the fact of it is that we're, the sort of Silicon Valley reimagining of the human being as a complex map of networked algorithms that one can sort of, play with and tweak and dial in different human beings, like the, Brave New World kind of thing. Mm-hmm. That's here. We're here. We're living in it. And if you don't want to be prey to those, to people that want to manipulate you, then it's important for you to learn these skills, these fluencies. Yeah.
Well, this is like the, in kind of the first iteration when I, having been an early adopter, when like in the late 90s, when everybody's parents and grandparents started getting computers and on the internet and stuff like that. In my own history, my daughter's great grandfather got totally sucked into it. And, he had to be taken away from the computer because he was buying into every spam, phishing, everything. He believed everything that was coming across. So, the deals like from Nigeria or from, it's like, send me this money and I'll give you this. And it was horrible. And like part of my early work, when I moved out into the sticks in West Virginia, I was helping exactly what you're talking about, to give new adopters a context of the technology, like what you can do with it, what do you got to watch out for. And then, one of my roommates is Antonio Lopez, who's very much we're going to have him on the show eventually. He's got a new book coming out, very savvy on media literacy. And I taught that in my daughter's school. And it was amazing to me how even these very tech savvy kids were completely, a lot of it was going over their heads. So I think that's a really valid point. And I think that it's something that I think should be brought to light more now. I mean, because it feels like this whole kind of crazy fake newsy stuff is just the next derivation of that early Nigerian scam thing, So anyway.
Michael, you mentioned Rushkoff's program or be programmed. We're seeing the end result of a kind of programming with the whole Trump phenomenon. People have just bought into this mythical thing that he's selling and are being told that as soon as he gets into his next administration, he will take us all back to the way the country should be, back to the 50s, and women would resume their duties in the kitchen and men would go off and be the breadwinner. And after COVID is gone, it'll all be like that. But do you really think post-COVID anything is going to be like it was? Is there any way what we saw just in the months before COVID appeared, will any of that come back, or is it going to be a totally new world?
Everybody's on mute.
Yeah, not that much has changed fundamentally, right? Like the laws of physics are the same. Evolution is still doing its thing. And we're just getting, we're just seeing it in different circumstances. Things have just been kind of like hot mapped in a different way. I don't, honestly, I think the conceits that we as first world Western modern people bring into a conversation like this one, I think those conceits are relatively rare in humankind. You know, if I mean, just for example, you know, if you look at the way that mobile banking took over Africa, even when they didn't have, you know, smartphones or like, you know, real like internet infrastructure, they were able, you know, the just text to pay stuff, you know, people just completely leapfrogged an entire, you know, technological generation with that kind of thing. And I think that, you know, that's why I would point people to, you know, generally speaking, Afrofuturism and Austrofuturism, like the, you know, Australian, you know, Greg Egan's stuff is amazing. There's, you know, the global South, I think, is a very excellent counterpoint and, you know, it's really interesting to see the ways that people are processing this in places that were not subject to receiving the same quote unquote progress in the same order. You know, that like certain, you know, people missed certain things and then things got much faster and much more global all at once, and then so they got much later technologies before they ever got all of the, you know, the intermittent stuff, or the, you know, the interstitial, you know, gradual developments. So we're looking at it a completely different way, and I think, you know, much of the world is probably quite at home. You know, a huge shout out to Eric Davis and his notions of reanimism. You know, for the, you know, the way that he sees, you know, the Internet of Things and living in a haunted world of electronic, intelligent agent devices, assistants, you know, smart homes and stuff, how that touches like an ayahuasca ceremony. And, you know, the pleroma disclosed through that type of experience, you know. And just, you know, just to speak to, you know, pornographers getting there first, 10 years ago, I was given a hit of acid by Ron Lawrence, who is Timothy Leary's friend and longtime personal assistant. And it was on my first trip to New Mexico, and really probably the seed of my being here, living here now. And I remember being, you know, out in the desert in Rio Rancho, you know, looking, you know, at a nightscape across 50 miles or more, and just realizing that space isn't empty. You know, I mean, admittedly, this was an acid trip, but this was me, you know, I was thinking, God, you know, the vacuum is just full of voices. It's full of stuff, you know, and maybe that was just my head, right? Maybe that's just all the neural firing. Maggie seems to disagree, you know, but I mean, this is where it gets,
I disagree.
Yeah, this is where the experimental design gets really exquisitely sharp, you know, where we have to get so nuanced and careful about teasing out the ways that, like, again, Eric Davis's book, High Weirdness, MIT Press, you know, not everything is socially constructed. There is the ontologically weird. There are things that are happening outside of the ambit of our bullshit. And, you know, there is the truly other is a valid, totally real thing. And how we reckon with that is the question, right?
Yeah, I think if it's kind of outside the reality that we've socially constructed, that it's usually invisible to us. And when you take psychedelics or when you have a kind of opening experience, as some people do, you see things that you otherwise wouldn't have seen. And, you know, one kind of meditation practice is to try to learn to see those things, you know, to see what is really there. But before we go any farther, I wanted to make sure you had a chance to talk about your music, because I know you released a new single today.
That I did. Yeah, amidst all of the other things going on, it's kind of, in a way, kind of ill-advised. But, you know, I was telling a friend this morning that I feel like this fall especially has been like riding a carousel of swinging hammers. And, you know, it's very sort of like Super Mario Brothers, which is super appropriate, actually, because the 1993 Super Mario Brothers film was, in my opinion, a masterful articulation of this kind of rupturing of the reality membrane that we're talking about here. You know, and I was talking about this with Eric Davis and with JF Martel and Michael Angelo and a few other interesting folks on Twitter last week about this sort of, you know, like we think about metafictions as, you know, it's, oh, we're aware it's a fiction. But then you look at something like Super Mario or like more recently Sonic the Hedgehog, and these are films in which we've taken a fiction and then we've ported it into another medium in a way that posits that it is a reality adjacent to our own, like 1987 Masters of the Universe also did. And you know, I feel like there's something distinct about that, about how, like, if we, you know, we cannot render something a fiction because of the Streisand effect, you know, that like by trying to make it fictional, we end up making it more real. We're like inviting it into our world a little bit more. And so it's this rupture that I was starting to intuit in 2008 when I wrote this song. Although none of this is like contained in the song, you might feel it in the instrumentation of this piece of music. That, you know, the instrumental back half of this song is really a kind of programmatic piece about a dream I had in which Boulder, Colorado, where I was living at the time, was being evacuated ostensibly because of an explosion, which it did not happen. Obviously didn't happen. Nobody heard an explosion. Something was up. And then we all looked up in the sky, and suddenly the entire sky, in the atmosphere, there was like a grid of floating lights and like a giant LCD screen or LED screen. And in the screen, it read 8:33, and 8:33 weirdly is the time that in the remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still, on Kathy Bates, the president's watch, when the EMP sent by the aliens to reset the planet stops her watch at 8:33. And 8:33 also, you know, numerologically is sort of like basically a statement that one's fate is angels. You know, that it is time for us to rupture the membrane of our atmosphere, or that, you know, that we are, you know, that by being forced into quarantine by the coronavirus, we have broken the quarantine of all of the ghouls and the spirits and all of the other things. You know, I'm getting to very like Dias de los Muertos here, but, you know, Jurassic Park, Burning Man VR. I mean, come on. Like, I mean, they're Jurassic Park next year, the last Jurassic Park film that you know, the consummation Jurassic World Dominion is like the one where they're walking down the street, you know, and that's the world we're in. And so like in that kind of milieu, it makes little sense for us to imagine ourselves to be trapped within our heads. You know, like if the dinosaurs are walking down the street, then you are not, you know, simply located within your own body. You exist in some sort of etheric plasma smeared across the surface of the entire noosphere, you know, like through it, you know, and all of its tangled banks. So that's what this is. That's what this song is. And I don't know, I guess I could play you a minute or two of it. Let's see here. Ooh. Or John, you can if your internet's faster.
John, you're muted right now.
All right, I got it. I got you here. Let's actually, you know what? I got it.
I've got it set if you want me to.
I'll take you into my master file for this track actually, because then you can actually see the
Pro master file. Here we go.
Yeah, my Ableton Live set of this song with all the keyboards and the drum loops and the guitars and the vocal lines. Let me start you around here. Let's see that. Yeah.
You know how to share the sound?
Let's see. Are we?
You have to go into share and select advanced, and then it says share computer audio, I think.
Yes. Here we go. Oh, it's saying I need to install an audio device. This is ridiculous.
Oh, shoot. Let me do it.
Okay.
Let's see. I'll have to stop yours. Okay, let's see. Whoa. What did it
I will
just tell
spare
me?
people the first half of the song, maybe, and just play the second half.
I just lost. Boy, this is turning out to be more complicated than I thought it was going to be.
Here.
Oh, there we go.
Ah,
Oh,
You don't get to listen to it.
so you have to not screen share.
Okay.
And then if you are not sharing screen, it looks like it will let me do it. Okay, now I need to go to where did you want me to start?
Oh, I would say start at like 3:11.
Oh, yeah. There we go. This is close.
So the song is over at this point, and then we've moved into the eschatological terrain here.
Angels appear when you're not trying to prove them, and the clouds clear. You don't have to move.
That's
That was-
hella cool.
that
That's
was really
beautiful,
good.
Michael.
Thanks.
Awesome.
And I love seeing the Ableton behind you there. That's great. Dang. How do you find all the time to do all this shit, Michael? I swear to God, you got a little girl and a wife and jobs and thinking and creating. You just do it. That's what I love about you. You're like a polished crystal. You're like letting it just like it's like parallel processing. You're my favorite parallel processor. So there you go.
Oh, thank you. I do genuinely worry that, I looked in the mirror the other day and I was like, God, I look old. Like I had one of those, for the first time, like, oh God, this year, what did this year do to me? And there is evidence linking sleep deprivation to Alzheimer's. And certainly it's the case that, living with a toddler and having your sleep regularly disturbed, even if I were not trying to bite off more than I can chew, is akin to, I talked about this with Stephanie Lepp, who I just had on Future Fossils podcast for a great conversation about the potential pro-social applications of deepfakes. We were talking about, because she's a mother, but she also just had a new baby, and we were talking about sleep deprivation and how it ushers you into this liminal space, sort of a hypnagogic space that is probably the reason for all of the things that I've been talking about now, is that, my waking life is kind of dreamlike, not just because of the internet, not just because of the sleep deprivation. There's like many factors sort of folding into this, but at the same time, it does make for it does put me in the seat of Orpheus, and I guess for that, I am grateful. I just have to remember to not look back, to not doubt myself and second guess myself, or I will lose Eurydice to the underworld. But then again, the underworld is like erupting right now into your grocery store. So
Can that be on a t-shirt? The underworld in your grocery store. That works for me. So I just wanted to say one thing. I know we have to wind up here, but
we're out of time, aren't we?
will be officially in New Mexico on December 16th for good. So
hallelujah.
I will be seeing y'all soon. So yay.
And I'm sorry to say we have reached the end of our hour. And that means, Michael, this is a cliffhanger, and we want you to come back.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Scoop. Thank you, Maggie. This was fun.
Yeah, it was. Come back, please. It was fun.
You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.